I wanted to talk about creating gradients in Illustrator. We have a palette that we use, the gradient palette. If you don't see it on your desktop, you can always go to your window menu and go down and find it. So it's just gradient here. If it's checked, it means it's open somewhere, so go ahead and look for it. And the gradient palette defaults to grayscale, so this is a little bit confusing. If I create a shape and I fill it, I click on the gradient palette, it will fill with the default, which is the grayscale gradient. And if I want to customize and change this, I need to basically go into each of the colors, white and black, and change the color mode so that it goes from grayscale to RGB or CMYK. So notice I'm down here clicking. You can click on black and you can scroll and kind of adjust the gradient, or you can click on white and you can scroll with it and adjust the gradient. I can also click in the middle here and create intermediate colors to kind of spread the fill differently or add more colors. Notice there's a little bar here too that lets you adjust each particular section of the gradient. And the opacity slider allows you to create specific opacity settings for each part of the gradient. So I'm selected on the middle slider. You know you're selected on the middle slider because it turns black. My two other sliders right now are white, and then when I click off the middle slider onto the white slider, that little triangle on the top turns black there. So if I don't want this middle slider anymore, I just want to drag it off. You just grab it with your mouse and literally drag it off, and you'll have your original two sliders. So let me go ahead and give this gradient some color. I'm going to select my white slider here. I'm going to go up to my color palette. Notice it says K here. That means the color palette mode is currently grayscale. So to add color, I have to switch that mode to either RGB or CMYK. So I'm going to go here. I'll just go to RGB, click on RGB. Once I'm in RGB, I can select any of the colors in that palette, or I can click on the gradient itself and add a color. Okay, so let me go back and click on the color, go into gradient, and see, now I'm clicking in the color and the color is filling into that slider. So you basically select the slider, you go to your color palette, you go to RGB or CMYK, you choose which palette you want, and then you click somewhere within the palette to find your color. Now notice the other slider, the black one, is still in grayscale mode. So if I click on that black slider there and I look up at my color palette, it's going to once again default to grayscale. So you have to do it for every time you click on the original two sliders here. So I'm going to go up. My black slider is highlighted. I can see that by the little triangle that's black. I'm going to go up here and I'm going to go down to RGB, and I'm going to choose a color here. So now I have a kind of a beautiful blue-green gradient. Notice you also can have your stroke properties on there. And if I want to add a third color, I click anywhere underneath here and I can add multiple colors if I want. And because I've changed the white and black slider here to the color RGB color mode in the color picker, I am not going to have to revert it again. So once you've done the original two sliders, you're fine. You're then in that color mode. So I can now just kind of have fun and choose my colors, play with my gradient. Notice that if you have too many sliders here, it tends to get kind of a lined look. And so often you want to have a minimal amount of sliders so that it looks very smooth and there isn't that kind of choppy lined look. So notice also there's a location slider here. There's a couple other things I want to show you in the gradient palette. You have a location slider which tells you kind of the spread of the gradient. And you have a little tab up here that allows you to create different kinds of gradients. So you can kind of play with this. You can go fade to black, super soft, black vinaigrette, green, yellow, orange, purple, radial. So there's a couple of options. You can have a linear gradient or a radial gradient. So radial kind of goes from the center and linear goes from side to side. And this location pops up because it's telling you how the colors are kind of sliding through the space here. In your toolbar, you have a gradient tool, and this gradient tool will allow you to kind of customize along with the gradient palette. So if I click on the gradient tool, the gradient sliders kind of pop up here. They look similar to what I have in the palette, and they're just allowing me to edit it differently. But what's nice about this is I can actually grab my gradient tool and then click and drag and slide the colors through the graphic in different ways. And it's kind of a visual, so the more I pull the slider, the more the colors will spread. If I pull it, a really short line here, it's going to have just that blue color, but if I continue to pull it through, it's going to start to get the green. And if I pull it really through, it'll become all green because it's going from one side to the next. So this is a nice function for you. You can play with that. You can modify it. You can spread the colors through the shape in many different ways. There's also a side palette here. You can hide the options or expand the options. So if you notice your gradient looks like this, and you're like, oh, where's all my options? Just go to this little tab here, go show options. It'll expand out, and you can start to modify and have fun with gradients. So I will be talking about this in class as well, but if you have any questions, let me know.